Florida International will be a different university in order that it may be a better university.
All right, good morning, everyone. Morning. Okay, in true Miami fashion, we're starting this off a little bit late, okay? I want to welcome all of you to FIU in DC. My name is Brian Fonseca. I direct the Jack D. Gordon Institute for Public Policy at FIU, and I'm privileged to be here at FIU in DC, which arguably we know as the Miami's embassy here in the nation's capital. This is an incredible footprint that we have here in which we have incredible opportunities to convene, to showcase capability and solutions from our researchers and our students. We have a dozen or so hospitality students here, one of my former students here in the audience, so it's great to have this space to convene on multiple levels and of course support our students as they make their way into the nation's capital, continue to make meaningful impact on the nation. In fact, this spring, the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs, in partnership with the Gordon Institute, is going to launch its Spring in DC, in which we're going to bring a dozen or so students to DC for the semester, in which they're going to participate in incredible internship opportunities, as they pathway into careers in service. And so we're excited to launch that in spring, and we're going to keep that going every semester as it continues to build. Today's participants in today's program is a real testament of our footprint here in DC. The relationship that we have with our alum, who we have several that are going to be participating in today's event, and of course the partnerships and friendships that we build throughout this community make it incredibly impactful for us as an institution, not just for our students, for our researchers, and more broadly building the connective tissue between Miami and Washington, D.C., or as we say, the 305 to the 202. I think that's commonly used. I want to first and foremost recognize Dr. Eduardo Gamada, who's here with us today. He has been the thought leader behind this survey, I want to say now for 10 years. And we're excited to continue to reprise his work and the work that he's doing to be persistent in ensuring that Hispanic or Latino voices are heard, are understood, and are being thoughtfully integrated as we think about policies and politics in the United States. And so he's going to lead the session in delivering some of the results from our latest Latino poll. He'll give you all the methodology in the background. This is the third iteration of the poll that we've conducted this year, so we have some interesting trend lines that we can also show. So we're really excited about rolling this out to all of you today. So that's the plan. He's going to deliver. After he delivers, we're going to have an opportunity to take some questions from the audience, and then we're going to have a quick reaction from both sides of the aisle. And representing both sides of the aisle today, we have a legend in FIU history, Mercedes Schlapp, who's with the Conservative Political Action Committee. We see her in the DC spaces, this one and previous DC spaces all the time. And in fact, what most people don't know is she's part of the reason that FIU has a footprint in DC, having been one of the first to really codify our presence. So a round of applause for Mercedes. She's worked for several members of Congress across multiple administrations, and we're excited to have her join us today. We also have Eduardo Rodriguez, who also is a great friend of the university. He's not an alum. We don't hold that against him, but he is a tremendous ally and friend of our institution, and we're grateful to have him in our sphere. He's co-founder of the Raven Group, a firm with great ties to South Florida, and we're excited to continue to nurture those relationships. He's now launching the Intersect Public Affairs, and interestingly and passionately, he's one of the biggest champions for the creation of a Smithsonian Museum commemorating American Latinos in the United States. So we're really excited about the work that he's doing. And then, of course, this is going to be moderated by another alumna, Carrie Hernandez of WUSA, here in the CBS affiliate here in DC. She's an FIU alum from our School of Journalism. And in fact, we just found out that she may have gotten her start at WSVN down in Miami. Then she brought that talent up to the nation's capital. And she is now, I said originally, an Emmy Award-winning executive producer, but is a multiple Emmy Awards-winning producer. So we're excited to have her here today to moderate the discussion. Our second panel is going to be comprised of two alumni as well. Laura Rodriguez of the Center for American Progress, who's also served as Chief of Staff in Congress and at the local level, as well as a career at the State Department previously, before that. And of course, joining us virtually is Jose Malea, who's the president of the Libre Initiative. And in fact, a fascinating fact there is Jose's son and my son are rising basketball champions on the same team in Miami. So we have a close connection there. But Jose has incredible experience at the national and local levels working campaigns. And so we're really excited of the cast that we have today to kind of parse the results that Eduardo is going to share with you. Before we jump in, I do want to recognize that the Latino poll is a product powered by the Latino Public Opinion Forum at FIU. It's comprised of multiple units at the university, the Gordon Institute of Public Policy, the Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom, the Green School of International Public Affairs, and of course the Kimberly Green Latin American and Caribbean Center. And so we're grateful for that group. We're also grateful for the support that we get from external partners like AdsMobil, who has kicked in funding to support this iteration of the poll. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to a friend, a colleague, a mentor, someone who has been an incredible contributor at the university and to sort of national discourse, Dr. Carlos Diaz-Rosillo, who is the founding executive director of the Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom. So, Dr. Diaz-Rosillo.
Thank you, Brian. I'm delighted to be here. As Brian mentioned, I'm the founding director of the Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom. Let me just give you a 2-minute summary of what the Adam Smith Center is, since we're fairly new. We were created by the legislature of the great state of Florida about 4 years ago to provide a better understanding of the free market system and what it means to not just American society, but to the world. We're not a regional center, we're global, although we have started our programming with more emphasis in the United States and Latin America, given that we're in Miami. We have a number of programs, from research publications, serious, rigorous research publications, to public events, from small roundtable discussions to large events. I think the biggest one was one that brought together a couple of thousand people to Miami, the World Strategic Forum. Next edition will be the 10th and 11th of December. That brings together business leaders and political leaders from all over the hemisphere. And we have a lot of educational programs. The flagship program is called the Senior Leadership Fellows Program. It's a program that brings to the center, to Miami, to FIU, every semester 5 top former government officials. And by top, I mean really, really top. We've always had every semester 1 or 2 former presidents of countries, ambassadors, senior government officials from the US, cabinet members from all over the world, not just Latin America. Currently, we have not only a former president of Mexico, but a sitting member of Congress in Mexico. It's a coincidence that we have 2 from Mexico at the same time. We usually don't do that. But we're now convening not only former government officials, but current government officials. And next semester, we have 2 sitting government officials as well, two ministers. And so the idea is to promote a more thoughtful, a civil understanding of the free market system and its impact on human prosperity. It's so divided, so polarized that it seems incredible that oftentimes we don't bring people who have different perspectives to have a thoughtful conversations. I just came from abroad, that's why I'm a little jet lagged. And I had I gave an address to a conference. I was talking about the election, and I was asked to talk about what a Trump administration or what a U.S. foreign policy towards Latin America might look like in the Trump administration. And there was a former Democrat senior government official who gave the other side what a Harris administration might do for Latin America. And right before the opening dinner, I was asked if it was okay to sit at the same table as the Democrat. I'm like, of course it's okay. In fact, we're good friends. She worked in at the Pentagon a few years ago, and we're actually good friends. And so the fact that I would be asked, and she was asked the same question, if we could sit together at the same table, because I worked for the Trump administration and she worked for the previous administration. I was like, wow, things are really divided. And so part of what we want to do is show that we have we have a difference of opinion. We don't share the same governing ideology. I think ours is right. She thinks hers is right. But the fact that somebody would ask if we can sit together shows just how divided we are. And so part of what we want to do is show that we can have differences, we can fight for our point of view, but we do it in a civil and respectful way. So that's why when Eduardo and Brian approached me a couple of years ago, if we would support this poll, we said yes immediately, because we think it's really important to find out with empirical data what Latinos think about not only political candidates, but also about issues that we care about. In the case of the center, economic freedom, capitalism. We want to know what Latinos think about socialism. We're not going to talk about that part of the results today, but we want to make sure that we are referenced so that whenever we have a discussion, we have facts, we have hard data to support our point of view with rigor and do it in a way that is civil and thoughtful. So thank you, Brian. Thank you, Eduardo, for leading this project. We're really honored to be part of it. And I know we're going to have a great discussion about some of the results. We're not going to hear all of them, but they're going to be online. They're going to be posted, and you can just delve into them and see what Latinos think about these issues. I know polls are just a snapshot in time. And of course, that snapshot changes as the days go by. And so, but it's really important to understand, at least in that point in time, what Latinos think about some of the most important issues facing our country. And now to continue the discussion, I'm going to ask Dr. Gamarra to come up here and then get into the actual results of the Latino poll. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming this morning. I know it's we're a few days from the elections, and there is so much going on out there that, and especially in a city like this, it's great to see FIU students here as well. So I want to thank Brian Fonseca for supporting this effort. Over the years, about a decade ago, we kind of envisioned this, and frankly, it was a struggle because trying to convince people that the Latino vote was important from a Miami perspective was interesting, and because in Florida, of course, especially Miami-Dade, our concern has largely been about how Cubans vote. And in fact, one of the most successful surveys that we've been doing at FIU over the last 30 years has been the Cuba poll, right? And that's been tracing the evolution of public opinion among our Cuban population. We've tried to do basically the same with the Latino poll, looking at other Latinos, especially with the influx of Colombians and Venezuelans and others, right? Even Bolivians, right? Into the United States and into Florida. So this was our attempt about a decade ago, and we were very fortunate, in fact, to be able to convince many parts of the university, in particular the Adam Smith Center. And Carlos Diaz has been very supportive of this effort, even though, as he pointed out, right, we don't necessarily see things eye to eye, right? And this effort has been really a very significant attempt at focusing on the data at a time when people are looking at things in a very, how should I put it, muy enfrentados. My story, Carlos, is that last week when I went to vote, I stood in line, and directly in front of me was this gentleman who was dressed from head to toe, right, like a Trump supporter, right? Hat, everything, And I walked up, and I'm sometimes controversial, and I gave, I'm on media on occasion, and he saw me, and as soon as he saw me, he came and he stood right next to me. And I said, oh my God, here, because right in front of us were a bunch of, very active people, and I said, okay, I'm in trouble. And he said to me, listen, I just want to know how you see things going. He said, I know how you're going to vote. And I said, and I know how you're going to vote, right? So we became very, very good friends. He's a 92-year-old man drives himself to the voting booth, right? And basically was saying, this is what I came for, right? So I think despite this kind of division that we have, there is some optimism, right? In the sense that we can work together. I think at some point we will get to that, right? It may be after Tuesday, but I'm hoping that that's the case. So what I want to share with you today are some of the results. The whole thing is online, and I hope that you'll be able to access it in the next few minutes. Let me. Where's the little button that I'm supposed to press here? There it is. So as Brian said, this is a collaborative effort that now includes the SIPA, the School of International and Public Affairs, and the Kimberly Green Latin American Center, right? I was privileged to direct the Latin American Center for many years, so I'm delighted that they are now part of this group. So the Latino Public Opinion Forum, which used to just be the Jack Gordon Institute, is now a university-wide effort, and that makes me very, very proud. Now, this, I don't right? Big states, large Hispanic concentration. But we also did a sample of the swing states, right? And in each state, we obviously took a proportional sample, but we tried to ensure that in no state did we have less than 100 people as respondents. So sample size, of course, kind of leads us to this margin of error with a 95% confidence interval, 3.1%, right? It's a pretty good number, right? Now, we balanced this, of course. We weighted it by, first by location, right? Because obviously California has a very large number, as does Texas and so on. So we weighted it to get the national sample. But we do have independent samples. We've studied the independent samples in the swing states. And in Florida, we took a large sample, right? In Florida, we have 620-something respondents. So we have an analysis of the Florida sample. And of course, we're in Florida, so we want to know what's happening in Florida. All right. So let me begin very quickly here, because I know I have very little time. So is the country headed in the right or wrong direction? And this is really quite interesting because nearly 50% believes that we're headed in the wrong direction, right? And in the context of an election, of course, that's an important question, right? Again, these are U.S. Latinos, swing state Latinos, and Florida Latinos. Now, we asked the same question in the July survey, right? And we see that it's improved somewhat, right? But you'll see that this is still a large number, right? In July, right? You all remember the context, right? 60% thought we were headed in the wrong direction, and today 49% thinks that we're headed in the wrong direction. Now, how is the U.S. economy? This is, of course, another critical question in the context of these elections, and as you see here, right? Again. Fair and poor, most think that the direction of the economy is not doing that well, right? And you'll see that this is kind of an interesting contrast because here you have people who identify with the current administration who still evaluate the economy as going in the wrong direction, okay? That's a critical issue, right? Now, this is the question, of course, that you're all interested in, and I put it at the very beginning rather than at the end, right? Who will you vote for in the presidential election? And here you see the very interesting contrast, right? U.S. Latinos, 57%. Latinos in the swing states, 56.8%. It's almost the same, right? But look at Florida, 49%, right? This, of course, is largely because of the influence of Miami-Dade County, all right? But there are other Latinos in the rest of the state who think differently, right? Now, So then this is the sample from the swing states, which of course all of you are very interested in observing, and you'll see, right, that this is the support for the Democrats, right? It's fairly stable, above 56%, right? With some interesting differences, perhaps. You might focus on Arizona, which has 25% of the population there is Hispanic, versus something like Michigan, which about 5% is Hispanic, right? And in Pennsylvania, where 7% of the population is Hispanic, most of it, of course, is Puerto Rican, right? And in the context of recent jokes, of course, it's become interesting. You'll find. Okay, all right. So this is comparing it to the July survey. I want to note something quite interesting. Look at the difference where the Democrats were in July among U.S. Latinos, right? 41.1 said that they would vote for Joe Biden. That survey was taken right after the debate, right? And when everybody was kind of clamoring for the president to step down, right? And the Kamala has basically returned the party to below where it was in 2020, right? It's not quite where it was before, but it's certainly, this difference is explained by the departure of the president and the arrival of Kamala Harris. President Trump has had very, very stable and consistent support. And in fact, as I was talking with Carlos earlier, right, this goes back to our earlier polls, right? There is 1/3 of the Hispanic electorate which has been solidly Republican for quite a long time. And now this is not, remember, this is a national sample, so we're not just talking about Cubans in Miami. In fact, I'll make the contrast with what my colleagues at the Cuba poll have found. They found in Miami-Dade among Cubans that 70% of Cubans would vote for Donald Trump next week, or have already voted. So this is the national sample, and you see that it's a solid, 1/3 of the population that supports the former president. Okay? Now, I wanted to note some things about gender, because in the whole deck you'll see the gender differences, because this is in large measure an election that not only might be determined by Latinos, right, but by the gender gap, and there is a significant gender gap among Latinos as well. It's not just among the general population, right? And you see it, for example, particularly in those who identify with Kamala Harris, right? More Latino women identify with Kamala than men, right? And that transcends into one particular key area, which we'll talk about in a minute, which is abortion, right? And of course, all of you are aware of the debate here, right? And then this is another one in terms of gender. So that's in the swing states, right? And very quickly, and of course in Florida, right? So across, see, in Florida, it's much more even, right? There are more Republican women than there are, in the rest of the country, right? So is there a gender gap among Latinos? Yes. And is it as pronounced as in the general population? Yes, outside of Florida, right? Okay. Now, this is a question of favorability, of course. How much do you like your candidate? And here we have some interesting things, right? I mean, it's the level of favorability for Kamala is high, right? In comparison to the favorability for the president, for the former president. So when you look at U.S. Latinos, 40% for the former president, right? And this is actually a pretty good number when you think about it, right? You would expect it to be a little bit lower given the voter intention, right? And of course, in Florida, it becomes a little bit more tight, right? Now, this is a very highly motivated electorate. And in large measure, I've said, well, maybe women will determine who wins, maybe Latinos will determine who wins, but really in the end, it's who turns out, right? And that's really going to be the key here. Let's not forget that Latinos historically have only, in 2020, it was a 54% turnout rate, right? And that was really historic. The average has been between 47 and 48, right? So this year, if Hispanics turn out in larger numbers, right, especially in the swing states, that could have a very significant impact. And the fact that they're so highly motivated. Now, this is a survey of likely voters. I forgot to say that at the beginning, right? These are likely voters, okay? All right. Now, so when we ask, how will you vote? This is another source of controversy. Remember that people are saying, well, you know, should we vote in person, by mail, or an absentee ballot? Most people are going to vote in person. But look at the number of people who say that they voted by mail, right? And very small fraction by the absentee ballot. That's sort of a normal distribution, right? Now, this is, of course, so high enthusiasm for voting, right? They're going to vote in person, right? But look at this. Do you trust that the elections will be conducted fairly, right? And this only shows the no and the not sure, right? Which tells you, right, fully 1/3 of the U.S. population of the U.S. Latino population does not trust the outcome. And the same, and if you look at swing states, it's higher, right? But look at this in Florida, right? Florida's run by a Republican governor, right? The entire state is run by the Republican Party. Most of the electoral boards are also, in some measure, leaning Republican, and yet you have this large number. This tells you we've also done a part of the survey measures trust in institutions. And what we're seeing, this is part of a global trend, right? Nobody trusts democratic institutions anymore, right? Or you have very high rates of people who don't trust it. But when you have this level of distrust for elections, that becomes quite problematic. Now, so let's go into issues. The issues are going to determine this in some measure. Now, again, we've sort of grouped these together. The main ones are inflation, jobs, and the economy, right? Inflation and jobs are number one, and abortion is number 3, right? Even though the number is relatively small, but that's essentially what we have, right? And here you have the comparison, right, of concerns. You'll see, for example, that among U.S. Latinos, increasing the debt and economic challenges are number 1, right? But look at number 2, right? Border and migration, right? If you look at swing states, the border comes down to number 3, but it's still up there. And if you look at Florida Latinos, right, it's basically concern for the border is number 1. Florida is a border state, by the way. All right. So you see how these concerns show you a little bit of what, stealing from one of my colleagues, I'm calling it cognitive dissonance, right? While Latinos are largely identifying with the Democratic Party, at the same time they're identifying with Republican issues, right? Because the border is really a Republican issue. And so we'll see this is really throughout, right? Okay, so let's go, where are these Latinos? Are they Democrats, Republicans, or what have you? And again, it's been relatively consistent with the past, right? They're primarily Hispanics, but this is when you ask them, right? What do you consider yourself, right? This is different from voting, but so you see really, that Latinos are really not as democratic, right? They're not registered, and in Florida in particular, right? The trend has been very, very clear, right? That in Florida, not only in general registrations numbers, there's about 1.4 million more Republicans in Florida today than Democrats, right? But Latinos are still the majority on the Democratic side, right? Except for Dade County, right? Dade County, of course, there's been a huge registration trend towards the Republican Party, right? Now, which party best represents your values, right? It's pretty clear again that there's this identification with with the Democratic Party, except for Florida, right? All right, and this is again, part of what we've been trying to really look at over the last year or so, because we've been hearing so much that Democrats are abandoning the party and moving into the Republican Party. And what we're finding is that, yes, there's a relatively important group that tells us that they've changed parties in the last year, right? 15% of a population of 36% who are eligible to vote is a relatively large number of people who say that they have changed parties. But the question is, right, how have you changed? And we have a whole battery of things, right? And so here, whoops, typo. Sorry, Carlos. Have you changed parties in the last year, right? In July, 14.5% told us that they had. 15% told us that they had. Now this is, if you look at the graph, it's just simply, the graph kind of distorts it. It's not that big of a difference, but clearly you see that more people tell us that they've switched parties. Now, so if you've switched, how have you switched? And this is where it really becomes kind of an interesting thing, right? Most tell us that they've shifted from the Democratic to the Republican Party, okay? So 30% of U.S. Latinos tell us that. In the swing states, it's 25%. And look at Florida, 42%, right? This is where the largest shift has occurred. But this is a significant number, you see, of people who tell us that but it's significant, but it's not as large as, if you read the general interpretation of this massive, massive move from the Democratic Party to the Republican. That's not occurring. It is occurring, but not in the numbers that we would expect. No. Now, so here you go. The switch from it's again the graphing is different, but it's dropped a little bit, but it still tells you that there's that movement is occurring, right? Okay, so immigration, right? Let's go back to this idea of cognitive dissonance that I was addressing before, right? These are Latinos, right? And when you think about this, right, we asked, this is agreement or disagreement with this statement, right? Do you agree that the most effective way, as he said, this is essentially a Republican talking point, right? It's to conduct a large-scale raid and implement the largest deportation, right? 36% agreement at the national level, right? 31%, 32% in the swing states, and 36% in Florida, right? That's a very large number of Hispanics who say, and this is why, often the question I get from reporters a lot is, how is it that Donald Trump can come to Miami-Dade and make this point, right, in Hialeah, right, to a predominantly Hispanic crowd? Yeah. So that becomes a big issue. All right, and then this, of course, new waves of undocumented immigrants are largely primarily criminals. 40% agree with that. Okay, again, another way of looking at things. Okay, on abortion, this is just the summary here, right? We asked six questions, right? From the total ban, right, to allowing abortion exclusively if the mother's life is at risk, right? And here you see, how this grows, right, in support, right? But still, 30% support a total ban, right? And 41% after 6 weeks, and so on, to the other position. So abortion is a key issue, and this is one, the crosstabs on gender, you'll find them in the presentation, right? And I want to end with, of course, this. We presciently asked this question. We didn't think that this was going to be the case, but we said, if Bad Bunny or Taylor Swift supports, see, we didn't know that, and we asked it, if he supported Kamala, what would it mean? And the results are quite interesting because, it's nearly 20% across the board, right? That 20%, so, this is very difficult to measure, really. This is it's a nice graph and so on, and it made you all smile, right? But to what extent really is this going to have an impact on the results? I don't know. So in any event, well, here you have across the swing states, right? And again, I guess they're fairly well known, right? I know some people travel just to go to Taylor Swift concerts. All right. Okay, so, all right, that's it. So you can find the results in online, and thank you so much for your attention. Thank you. Okay, all right. And there's a panel coming up, right? Yeah. Okay, great, thank you. ¿Tú vienes, no? I think are there questions? Yeah. Okay.
Quick questions, first to the panel.
Quick question, okay, great. But we have a panel coming up, right?
Yeah, after. Go
Oh,
ahead.
after, oh, okay, all right, great. Yeah.
I have a couple of very different questions, and just for the record, I'm just seeing the results right now,
Yeah.
as are you. If you go back to one of your earlier slides when you talk about the methodology and how many respondents and the demographics, I think it was the second slide maybe, or
Yeah.
right around there, very, very beginning.
Sorry.
When you talk about the demographics of the sample size, the third
Whoops.
one, yeah, two more, I think. One more, that one. If you look at the descriptive variables at the bottom,
Uh-huh.
male 46%, female 43%.
53%, yeah.
So
That's the national distribution of
right,
Hispanics.
which
yeah.
is likely to be different from the real distribution, right? We expect that
Oh, yeah.
men and women are going to be roughly half and half.
Yeah.
Given that the sample size includes a lot more women than men, and given that there's a sizable gender gap, how do you take that into account?
We weighted it.
Weighted it based
Yeah,
on
based on the net half and half.
Perfect.
Yeah, we weighted it 50-50, yeah.
Right. And then
But this is the distribution of
The actual
the actual,
size.
right. No, this is the distribution, that you find in the census,
Right.
okay? In other words, there are more Hispanic women there are men, okay? But we weighted the sample by 50-50, okay?
Second question, if you go towards, that's the third slide, maybe 11th, 12th, towards, closer to the middle, I'm going to tell you, when you talk about, a little bit more, when you talk about the actual candidates, and you meant, that one, okay.
sorry.
All those slides.
Uh-huh.
Anyone. If you look at let's look at Harris.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the distribution, the percentages of that column,
Yeah,
57, 54, and then you go 24, 32, and then you go 1.1. What do those numbers represent?
it's the number of people who identify with Kamala Harris, who are male or who are female,
Okay.
okay?
But those numbers add up to more than 100%.
They do, because they're not representing they're not, in other words, we don't have the total by column, we don't have the total by row, but by column,
Which
okay?
is why then, I don't know.
Right, doesn't add,
that's-
right.
That's why they're not up to more.
No, they don't add, exactly, right, okay? So if you add all this up, this will be 100%, but we're distributing, okay? All right, is that it?
Yeah, thank
Okay, listo, okay. Thank you, I think I'm done.
All right, as we get the chairs situated, we'll keep it moving. There we go. You guys hear me? Okay? Oh, there we go. Hear me okay. All right, like we said earlier, I'm Caridad Hernandez. I am currently the news director at WSA 9, the CBS local news affiliate here in Washington, D.C., but I'm officially from the 305, born and raised. I'll be leading these two panel discussions. And of course, with your help and your questions, we'll be having them. But I'm first going to start off saying, when we talk about the Latino vote, we should remember there really is no such thing, right? Because there are Latinos and Latinas who vote. Right now, we are a diverse and complex electorate, right? 36 million, up 4 million from 2020. And that number will even grow by 2032 as well. So let's dive into that conversation right now with our panel. I'm going to start with introducing Mercedes Schlapp with the Conservative Political Action Committee, and she's also a former White House Strategic Senior Advisor to former President Trump. Estuardo Rodriguez, he is the principal and founder of the Rabin Group. and of course, Dr. Gamarra. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. All right, so let's start off this conversation strong. According to our new poll, we were talking about 66% of voters saying that they are motivated to vote. But there's some new numbers that came in since yesterday, early voting. 62 million people have voted across the board, but reports are showing that even in the battleground states, Latinos are lagging behind other groups in early voting. And I'll start with you, Mercedes. What do you attribute that to? And what do you think the candidates should be pushing in these last few days in their messaging?
Well, thank you all so much for having me. Carlos Becerra, who is incredible in running this institution here. Dr. Gamarra only seems to get younger, because when I was a student, I don't think you've changed at all. It's amazing. So it's so wonderful to be here.
I used to be taller.
So me too. And my FIU familia, and it's great to be with you as well. So look, I think what we are looking at right now when it comes to these early votings, I'm going to give you two examples. One is Nevada, for example, which our political team is observing carefully. There is definitely a lag when it comes to the Democrats and what you saw in terms of early voting back in 2020. Now, of course, there was a lot more mail-in voting because of the COVID pandemic. But what we have witnessed is about 15% of these low propensity voters that are coming out to vote for the Republican ticket, for Donald Trump. And so you've seen this lag within Nevada in terms of the Democrats voting and the Republicans actually, which Republicans normally don't traditionally vote early. You're actually seeing this phenomenon of Republicans coming out to vote early now, for example, in Nevada. I'll give you Pennsylvania, for example. Back in 2020, you had Democrats at this point in the election with over 1 million mail-in votes. Right now, it's only 300,000 in terms of early voting, maybe a little more than that, maybe like 370,000 early votes for the Democrats. Again, I think for Democrats, that's very concerning. It is promising for Republicans. I will say I attribute that, I think, to the lack of enthusiasm for the Kamala Harris candidacy. And I think, again, I think that for Republicans, they are cautiously optimistic. But I will tell you, the Democrats in these past elections have had a better, I would say, get out the vote effort, more organized than Republicans in the past. So the key will be what will happen now as you're getting to Election Day, where Republicans do normally go out more so than Democrats on Election Day to vote. So at this point, it's a wait and see to see where these numbers fall.
So what do you think the key message needs to be in these last few days?
Well, I have to say, I think for President Trump's team, their closing argument has been Harris broke it, Trump's going to fix it. And so I think there's been several mishaps from a messaging standpoint on the Democrat side, where I think President Biden basically stepped over Kamala Harris's closing message by calling, by making the comment of supporters of Trump being garbage, and then you had Mark Cuban going after the strong and intelligent women that have worked for Donald Trump or support Donald Trump. I think there's been a couple of mishaps on the message discipline side. We have plenty of ours on our side too, okay, so don't worry. But on the Democrat side, I think if I were on the Kamala Harris campaign, they got to go into the messaging of what policies are going to offer the American people. I don't believe that threat to democracy message and the Nazi fascist message of calling Trump supporters, that I don't think that is effectively working for their team.
Gotcha. Thank you. All right, Estuardo, I'll ask you the same question, right? We're talking about early voting. What do you think that's attributed to, and what do you think needs to happen in the next few days in as far as messaging?
Great. Thanks so much for the invitation. I share Mercedes's comments about FIU and the leadership here. I've known Carlos for a long time, and my claim is that I bartended on South Beach, so I gave many FIU students drinks down on South Beach when I was going to school down there. Look, I think this is all about incentivizing, motivating, having a plan to get out to vote at this point, because people are entrenched. Right now, the Trump voter is the Trump voter, and they're not going to change their mind. The moderate, the independent, conservative probably has also made up his or her mind already as well.
True.
The rhetoric going back and forth, as Minnesota was just saying, he said this, she said that, or Biden said that. That might get some attention, but it's not going to persuade somebody within the next 3-4 days before they have to get out and vote. I do think the machine out there on Harris's side is bigger. It is mobilizing more people. The early vote numbers total across the board is historic for all voters, Republican and Democrat. How that breaks out, because we don't know, the Republican who, as we might say in Spanish, el republicano arrepentido, who doesn't want to vote for Trump, I mean, we don't know where they're going to fall, right? But the numbers indicate there are some that have broken away, that are never Trumpers, or at least don't call themselves that, but that they are moving. Simply because they don't like what Donald Trump represents. I think, Mercedes, if anyone knows the distinction between, because of your work with George W. Bush, a very different Republican than what Donald Trump has been offering. When you see the messaging and the rhetoric that comes out of that campaign, it's really not like, here's the policy that we're going to run to help small business owners. It's not substantive policy. It's very much broad strokes of, immigrants are taking jobs, they're taking your housing. It's just incendiary. And so I think that what we're going to have to see here from both campaigns, specifically the Harris campaign, is driving home the success, because we have over 13 million jobs since the pandemic created. The job numbers came out today. If it wasn't for the hurricane that hit Florida and Pennsylvania, then you probably would not have seen, North Carolina, you probably would not have seen the dip. But accounting for the hurricane, the jobs lost because of that, you still had job growth. That's a historic number of time to consistently see that kind of job growth, and the increase of wages, the support among the broader Latino community in terms of their personal wealth, that consistently has gone up. So that positive message, I think that's what they have to keep hammering home to incentivize these voters to come out, to turn out the vote. That's at the end of the day, that's where we are at this point.
Do either of you have thoughts? I'm going to jump. I wasn't going to include this, but I did read about it this morning. Latino men, that both campaigns are saying, you know what, in these last few days, we have to target Latino men. Any thoughts on that?
You want to say, because you're a Latino man.
I was just talking about this before. Are there other Latino men here? I think, look, I'll throw in, I normally do not talk about my Latino Museum work when I talk politics, because the Latino Museum work has been wholly bipartisan from day one. George W. Bush signed the Latino Museum Commission bill way back when. And so I want to make it very clear. But what I will say, in my 20 years of advocating for a National Museum of the American Latino on our mall, I have seen and witnessed such division within our community as it comes down to what our origin stories are. I've had Cuban Americans say, I don't want to support a Mexican museum. I've had Mexican Americans say, I don't want to support a museum that's going to whitewash Spanish atrocities across, So those stories are so different in their origins, right? And when we talk about politics, it's evident there that the divisions exist, because Latino men culturally, and I would say writ large, you've got some cultural biases, right? Machismo, the colorism within the broader Latino community, I mean, that is real. And when you look at some of the data around Latino men, you should not ignore that. You have to acknowledge, okay, the Latino community, a very significant amount of machismo and racism that exists. How do you confront that? Right? How do you address that? And that's Harris's challenge here in making sure that she has, all right, Bad Bunny, now everyone thinks that FIU has a personal relationship with Bad Bunny. but I mean, that helps.
Do you, Carlos?
I know.
Oh, Pitbull. Okay. Sorry.
Mercedes.
Well, first of all, I do think we both can agree that the economy is going to be the driving issue for this election. I think for Latino voters as well, it's not only seen in the polls. While we are seeing this job creation, the numbers were obviously a lot slower pace than anticipated. There was a loss of manufacturing jobs. There was a loss of private sector jobs. I think the issue of inflation is what's really hurting the Latino family. Everywhere I have traveled in Arizona. We're heading to Pennsylvania here shortly. In all these different states, that is a conversation that I have on the ground when talking to voters. They cannot afford to pay for their basic needs. Food prices are up over 20%, electricity prices up, rent, mortgage. It is unaffordable. And so it's put a situation where more and more Americans have had to take on two jobs. And I think that lingering inflation has been what I think has been the biggest challenge, I would say, for the Biden-Harris administration. And even Harris talks about the cost of affordability. And I think for Donald Trump, he has gone back to saying, look, you were better off 3.5 years ago than you are today. And I think that's the big message from the economic standpoint of saying, how are you going to bring businesses back to America? If you're raising corporate taxes, if you're continuing to put tiresome regulations on small businesses and you're strangling these small businesses, that's going to be an issue for, I would say, Latino small business owners, for employees, for the single moms, for the families that have to raise their kids because they are financially stressed out. So I do believe that is an opening for the Trump campaign to reach out to those independent voters, especially on this issue of the economy. I think when it comes to Latino men, I have seen that the campaign has done a very strong focus on reaching out to that male voter. I would say there is a Latino men component as well. I was down with President Trump at the Latino Summit, but also, for example, when he's done a podcast like Joe Rogan, or it's very much focused on how do we get these young men to support us? How can I connect to that voter? And obviously, we've seen him done, I would say, more creative public relations stunts, like the driving in the garbage truck and going to McDonald's and working. And I think that there's these connections to the working class that I think is working, as opposed to, I think, Kamala Harris, which has come across a little more not necessarily defining her clear message on how she's going to, relieve the pain that these Latino families are feeling.
No, thank you. All right, let's move on. Also in the poll, the new poll that came out today, voters were asked if they changed parties, right? And I found the numbers to be really interesting. From Democrat to Republicans, Democrats saying that they switched to Republicans. 41% North Carolina, 33% in Pennsylvania switched to the Republican Party, 25% in Michigan. And that's a trend I know that we're seeing all over the country. I'll start with you, Dr. Gamarra. What are your thoughts on that? And I want to hear from both of you.
Yeah. Let me try to address a couple of things here that are important.
Oh, I think we're getting enough. I don't know. No, I'm kidding.
My sense is that what you have right now, especially in terms of, in fact, it was your original question, right? What is the U.S. Latino, right? And look, if I'm not mistaken, right here, just if we were to ask everybody here, right, where you're Latino, you're a Latino man or a Latino woman, we're everything, right? I'm Bolivian, you're Cuban, you're Mexicans, et cetera, et cetera. We are an entire, very complex phenomenon. More importantly, right, what we're seeing now is that there are some very significant generational features to the vote, right? That as you become more American, right, or estadounidense, as some people would say, right, you tend to be more like the general public, right? That's why the issues of inflation are so important and not the others, right? So I think it's important to understand that. And when you do the crosstabs by national origin, which we've also done, that's where you begin to see some of these clear differences, right? There is no question, for example, how significant the tie is between the Republican Party and Cubans in Florida, right? But by the same token, if we look at Mexicans across the country, there's no question about the significant tie that there is between the Democratic Party, right? But chipping away at the borders is where we're really, looking at. And the chipping away, I think, is a product of two things. One, people becoming more American, right? And therefore identifying with issues that are not necessarily related to questions that immigrants are concerned about. That's number one. And then I think it has to do in some measure with a message, right? And here, I think Democrats have done three things wrong, okay, over the years. And I've said this repeatedly. One, they always start late, right? Always. There's never a campaign where Democrats start early. Republicans always start early or they never stop campaigning, right? Number two, they take communities for granted, right? And this is probably one of the main errors. I think they're trying to do a better job of correcting that. But over the years, it's been, well, Mexicans are ours, we don't have to worry about it, Puerto Ricans are ours, and so on. And we saw that in Florida in particular. We saw it in the 2022 elections with Puerto Ricans. 46% of the Puerto Ricans in Florida voted for the governor.
Which
right?
is shocking. That's
exactly.
High. That's
it's a
high.
very high number, right? Now, it was a very low participation, right, election. But that also tells you, why did they vote for the governor, right? In large measure because Republicans paid attention, right? And then the third thing is, just that there are some very poor candidates. Candidate selection is really extraordinarily important. And I think when you look, especially at some of the Republican candidates across the country, right, the candidate selection has been, not whether I like them or not, but they're better than the candidates that Democrats have elected. And so, in part, I think those factors explain why the appeal to certain parts of the demographics. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. If you want to comment, and also I'll add, Republicans to Dems in the other direction in Georgia, 54.5%. Wow. And then Republicans to Independents, what jumped out at me was Nevada, 45%.
So I think the independent number is critical here. And I would love to get both of you's opinion on this, because I do believe that like Americans, Latinos, like Americans, are becoming more independent. They're basically disillusioned with both parties. And so what happens is that it's almost like we're becoming, and Carlos, you would know this best, like Latin America in a certain way, where it's about the personality, the cult of personality that drives people to a movement, right? Mm-hmm. As opposed to the party. And so it's been interesting to watch how there is a growth of the independent voters, especially amongst young people. And, I think the other piece of this is that and the parties are kind of just like, it's all about, well, you either like Donald Trump, you don't like Donald Trump, you either like Kamala Harris, you don't like Kamala Harris. And I do run into these people who will say, yes, I'm for Donald Trump 100%, but I'm not going to vote for the Republican candidate down ballot. So there's a division amongst the, top candidate and the down ballot candidate, going back to your analysis of that the candidates necessarily, while because they have to win a primary process, end up either being a little too far to the right or a little too far to the left, and so those center voters are saying, I can't connect with these people.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Sorry, I had some production.
I've got to push back on the professor here. I don't think Republicans are necessarily picking great candidates at all. And I'm not saying that just to be partisan. There's some really terrible, North Carolina. Should we talk about the candidate that they picked? Okay, I can go on and on. So just wanted to push back a little bit on that. Because they're professors. And so when it's a professor talking, everyone assumes like, yeah, he knows exactly what he's talking about. I
think he does. I don't know what you're talking about.
On that one point. On the one point.
There are exceptions, right?
There are a lot of exceptions. And Bolivian, Peruvian vecino, I'm sorry about landlocking you.
You didn't, the Chileans did.
Terrible. That's right.
No,
so yeah, there's a shift. I agree with Mercedes, though. I think it's about the fact that we are a two-party system country. Whether you hope one day that the Green Party makes it and builds a base or name the other one, there's always some efforts, but they falter because you don't have a strong enough base around the country to make. I mean, you look at England, chaos when you see them legislate, but there are so many parties there that they work together to combine to form a government. I don't think we're going to get to that. But I do think you have people who identify in principle with being a Republican or being a Democrat. And that is starting to show during elections where people break away and don't just go party straight ticket, which is why there's so many opportunities for Democrats to take the House. Senate's going to be very hard, but there's an opportunity because of the relationship that these candidates have on the ground personally. You've got in Iowa, historic Latino voter, Latino candidate, Peruvian also. It's shocking to see that in a state that is traditionally known to go conservative, his personal relationship and engagement has put him in the margin where he could likely win, right? And we're going to keep seeing that, and the shift between, I think that's going to continue to change back and forth. And to your point earlier about Democrats starting late, it's because the presidential elections start earlier and earlier. All the time. It's amazing to see how long we've been running for office already.
Can I just add one
Marissa,
more
please,
point?
please.
So you look back at, for example, Obama. President Obama got over 70% of the Latino vote when he ran in 2012. Then you're going to, let's say, Biden back in 2020. So that number dropped to about 68, 66%. And we're looking at these polls, and Kamala's at 56%. That's a significant drop of the Democrats really being able to have a stronghold over the Latino vote. And I think that's where Republicans, I will say, where I think we have been behind is that, President Bush understood from Texas, so he understood we have to prioritize the Latino vote. But there was a period of time, like Mitt Romney, no idea how to reach out to the Hispanic voter. John McCain, same. And I was part of all those campaigns. I mean, goodness gracious, I feel like I've done campaigns for like 50 years at this point. But I will tell you, so I do think that the Republicans, and this was back in 2020 when it was like three of us that in the Trump campaign, and they said, here you go, here are your resources, go out and get the Hispanic vote. And it was we prioritized how we were going to win that Hispanic vote. And President Trump surprisingly did decent. He did good. And so I think that it has been chipping away at these these traditionally Democrat Latino voters, really honing in on the independent votes. But I have seen that for the Democrats, they have slowly and even more so, I think, been losing the support while there's still a majority supporting them of the Latino vote.
Yeah. Can I just...
Yeah, please.
You'll see in the survey, I mean, this is very clear. Young voters are trending independent. Yeah. I mean, that's really clear. The second thing, to my colega peruano, there are some very good Democratic candidates, don't get me wrong. But in general, what's happened is that it's almost, a last-minute decision, right? And then the third thing, which is really interesting here, is I think what we're going to see is a lot of split-ticket voting. The abortion issue, for example, in Florida, I think what you're going to see is Amendment 4, right, is going to pass, right? Or is going to be very close to passing, and largely with a lot of Republican support, right? And yet they'll still vote for Trump. You see, so they'll vote for Amendment 4 and marijuana, but they'll vote for Trump. Okay?
All right, well, we'll need to start wrapping up here, but last points. Does the strategy have to change in the future, right? We just can't treat all Latinos the same. What do you guys think?
I'm happy to go first and wrap up. Two things. One, I think the strategy is changing because of all of the alarm bells that were ringing even 2 years ago around the initial polling. I will say there's a lot of polling out there. There's a lot. Some actually have Kamala Harris back up 60% plus in terms of Latino support, nearing the Obama numbers, if not, getting close to it. The best poll out there, the day after that poll, very accurate. So, we'll take a look at what those numbers are, and that's going to continue to drive because, as I said, even though it was tongue-in-cheek, the elections start earlier and earlier. I mean, this has been one of the longest elections that we've ever seen. I will say also that the danger for us in terms of Democrat and Republican is that from the day that Donald Trump started running for office, the first time, he immediately started to criticize and undermine the integrity of our democratic elections. That has been consistent. even though he won, he still said it was all questionable. And now we're seeing again, this election's happening, and so many of the base of his supporters believe that the system cannot be trusted. That goes right to the point of what you were saying when you talk about in the polling. If you don't believe in the system and the leader of that campaign is telling you can't trust it, even if he wins, that means it's starting to break the foundation of our democratic system. And where he wants to go with that is very dangerous. So think about that as the real issue that we're dealing with. We'll see where the elections take us, but there's a longer issue here that we have to deal with, and that is our democratic system and how we make sure it remains the pillar of the world in terms of democracy.
That's right, and that's why we hope that we can have a whole panel on election integrity, which I'm happy to host, and we can all come together again on that. But I will say, I do think the trust in the election system is incredibly important, and it's up to the Secretary of States, both Democrats and Republicans and governors, to ensure that there is election safeguards in each of their states. I mean, obviously, when it was in the middle of COVID and it was in the middle of chaos and they were changing laws at the end, it created a lot of skepticism there. At the end of the day, we just want to make sure we come together, whoever wins, whether it's Kamala or President Trump, and hope that there is not a civil unrest or that there is violence on the streets, because that is truly a possibility that we're seeing here. And this is where, I keep, we at CPAC do international CPACs across the globe, in Hungary, in Israel, in Japan, in Australia. We now just were in Spain, and we did one in Brazil and in Mexico, and now we've been invited to go down with President Milei for CPAC Argentina. So I've learned a lot, as Carlos and Dr. Kumar, I know you all are involved on the Latin America front, is that we don't want to turn the U.S. into many of these Latin American elections. We need to make sure that, you want to know the day of, that night of, who wins. In the vast majority of the countries across the globe, you go to Europe, you go to France, you go to Germany, you know who is winning that night. And so I think we are, as a developed nation, as a country that knows we should have the systems in place to make sure that the American people know who their president is the night of the election. With that being said, on the Latino vote, I think what's critical, I think for both parties, is that they know they can't take them for granted. The Latino voter is becoming stronger every single day. They are getting more involved. We're seeing more and more men and women, Latino men and women, involved in the political process, and we encourage that. Because they have to be part of the decision-making process in the administration. I worked for President Trump in the White House, as did Carlos, and we were very valued members of that administration to provide what the Hispanic community is thinking. So that is one thing we definitely want to encourage, is that whoever wins, that make sure that they have, good Latino advisors around them to be able to say, look, I have my ear to the ground. This is what we're hearing. This is what the community cares about. So let's do what's good for the community and for the country.
Absolutely.
Just two very, very quick things. One is, I think that this questioning of the electoral system, and you were mentioning the comparison with Latin America, right? We have a very unique system, as all of you know. It is unlikely to change.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? It will not change. And so we're going to have an electoral college, and we're going to have this division with a popular vote anyway. We also do not have a national electoral court, right? Which is what we have in all of our countries in Latin America, where it's one court that runs the elections, and so you see consequences like the ones in Venezuela. Here we have an extraordinarily decentralized system, and one of the big issues is you have 67 different elections in Florida. Right, 67 counties, and divide that by the number of, so that system is not going to change. So how do you work within that is really the issue. And I think that part of what the conversation that needs to occur in the United States, and especially about Latinos, is that, we are, like somebody, has been saying, we are American citizens. We are now the largest minority in the United States. We are going to be Democrats, Republicans, and Independents. But we are first and foremost American citizens, and we have to be part of the conversation, right? As you two have been in the Trump administration, and those of us who are Democrats like to be on the other side. But if that conversation breaks down in terms of the kinds of rhetoric that we have seen in this electoral cycle, the demonization of certain people, of certain groups, I think that's not healthy. And I think we really need to move forward beyond that, right? Let's talk about your talents. Let's talk about what we as a community have brought together, whether we're Democrats or Republicans.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, Mercedes Estuardo, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to be a good producer here and move us on time. I'd like to get our second panel started, where we're focusing on the inflation and the economy. Joining us up here is Laura Rodriguez. Laura is the VP of Government Affairs for the Center for American Progress. And also joining us this morning is Carlos Diaz Rosillo. He's the founding director of the Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom. Good morning. Thank you.
Morning.
How are you guys doing? All right. We'll move here quickly. So we know that these were the two top issues in our new poll, the inflation and the economy. Again, this is something that campaigns are focusing on. Reports are telling us that Harris and Trump both see economic policy as their best chance to win the Latino vote. Let's talk about those economic concerns. I'll start with you, Laura. What's pushing people there?
Thank you so much. And by the way, I'm also an alum and a graduate of the School of Communications and Journalism.
Oh, yeah, awesome.
So, yay. Go Panthers. And apologies, I'm going to be looking at some notes just because I was able to look at, see some of your numbers. And I really wanted to focus on some of the similarities we've seen. As we know, polls lately have been incredibly difficult to do and be accurate. And so when you find polls that have similar trends, I think that's really interesting to see because you can see a little more consistency. Okay. So very much like Dr. Gamara's poll, we did a Cap Action, did a poll about housing specifically and costs. And we had an oversample of Latinos, and certainly housing and affordability were a top issue. I think that the difference here is that we're not talking about, that might be a top issue, but no one voter is a single issue voter. They're going to weigh that against some of their other interests. And some people are single issue voters. It's not usually the economy, by the way. It can be anything from gun violence, abortion, the border. Those are all things that drive single issue voting much, much more so than the economy. But I do think that because we're still seeing more support for Kamala Harris, for example, from your poll, I think the disconnect between the economy being a concern and the realities of who they're going to vote for really falls into place when you talk about the policies that each party supports. And just to give you one really quick top line from our poll is that 84%, I'm sorry, a majority of Latino voters, 71% of the Latino voters that we polled felt that government should be involved in housing policy. Something really simple, but it's also very counterintuitive to what a lot of Republican policies are, which is let the market deal with it. Government shouldn't be too involved. And when you think about that kind of disparity, 71 to 23%, that you start to see why, when you're talking about actual policies that are affecting people, they're still supporting the Democratic ticket.
Awesome. Carlos, I want to get your take on the poll, but one thing I want to turn to is the talk about inflation, right? Is it realistic for us to really think that prices are going to go down, regardless of what administration comes into power next?
Sure, and just one quick point of clarification. About 40 minutes ago, a little earlier, when I spoke to welcome all of you, I spoke in my capacity as the director of the center. And so I take that very seriously because the center is nonpartisan. So
Okay.
I tried really hard to make sure that everybody's welcome at the center.
Of course.
In this case, I'm not speaking as a director of the center, but as a voter who has opinions about one candidate and the other. And so what I'm going to say now is my own personal opinion, not the opinion of the center or of FIU. So I can answer your question honestly and truthfully. I think the Harris campaign has a tougher job to sell on the economy for one very simple reason. Ever since the 1980 and the 1984 campaigns, when President Reagan asked a simple question, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? That has been sort of the central question when it comes to every campaign, because the economy tends to be the number one issue that voters care about consistently. And so when the answer to that question is yes, the incumbent candidate, whether it's the incumbent president running for re-election or the incumbent vice president running for election, if the answer is yes, that candidate tends to get elected or re-elected. When the answer is no, the challenger tends to be elected. And so what we're seeing here is as Mercy mentioned, an effort on the part of the Trump campaign to say, the economy is a mess, Trump will fix it if he gets elected. And it's harder for the vice president to deliver an economic message of hope and joy and optimism, and things are going to be better off if she gets elected when she has been the sitting vice president for almost 4 years. And when 2/3 of voters, and I'm talking about all voters, not just Latino voters, when 2/3 of voters feel that the country is going in the wrong direction. And one of the issues that they particularly feel strongly about is inflation, as you mentioned. And so the administration and the campaign, the Harris campaign, has been spending a lot of time delivering a message based on numbers that, when the administration began, inflation was at roughly 9%, and now inflation is down to below 3%, and things are getting better, and inflation is going down, unemployment is going down. But what we're seeing is that Americans are not feeling that in the pocketbook. And while inflation is going down, that doesn't mean that prices are going down. Prices continue to go up. They just go up at a slower rate. And so what people are feeling is that when they go put gas on their cars, when they go buy groceries, things are getting more expensive. Yes, they're getting more expensive at a slower rate, but they're still getting more expensive. So I think she has a tougher time because while the macro numbers are better, people don't feel that in their pocketbook, and they feel that things are getting more expensive. And so there seems to be a disconnect. And the question that a lot of voters are asking is a very simple one. If things are going to be so much better off when she gets elected president, why haven't they gotten better? What has she been doing over the past almost 4 years that I don't feel it in the pocketbook? Why are still things getting more expensive? And so that message is a lot tougher than the message that President Trump has to deliver, which is, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And for the vast majority of Americans, the answer is yes. And so if we go by the historical record, when the answer is yes, they're better off, they vote for the incumbent. When the answer is no, they're not going better off, they vote for the challenger. And because the answer is so clear now, I think he has an advantage. So I think on the question of inflation, on the question of unemployment, the question is not what are the numbers, but what are voters feeling in their pocketbook?
If I could just
please.
respond to that, I completely agree with Carlos. The problem with a lot of these policies is that it takes time to feel it, right? And inflation is down as of today to 2.1%. We are 0.1% from where the Fed wanted to be, right? And again, the 13 million jobs that we've been talking about forever, and that low unemployment rate that you mentioned. But you're right, people don't feel it. But there's a difference between a feeling and reality, and that's where the disconnect is. And I will say there's also a difference between what they're feeling when you're saying the prices don't go down, because this is cumulative inflation versus your daily prices, right? So there's a little bit of a lack of understanding. You have to get into the weeds, really, to explain this to voters, which is really, really tough. And it does make it a very difficult message for the Harris administration. But I will say I'm not sure that 2/3, I've not seen that number, that 2/3 think that it's that they were better off 4 years ago, because 4 years ago we were in the middle of a pandemic.
Exactly.
And so in fairness, it actually might not even be a fair question for the Trump campaign to ask, because it's really, people were shut in and lots of loss of jobs, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a little bit of a different dynamic
were
this
being
time.
sent out at that time, right?
From Congress, right?
Right? A lot of
And
checks
so
were going out.
I do think that there's I think that there's an anomaly in that question this time around.
So the 2/3 number is not, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? It's, is the country going in the right or wrong direction? And 2/3 say it's going in the wrong direction. Again, national polls, Gallup, they consistently ask that question. So it's not, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? It's, is the country going in the right direction? And so the inference is, if it's going in the wrong direction, are you going to vote for the candidate that promises continuity, or are you going to vote for the candidate that promises change? And that's where I think there's an advantage for the Trump campaign there. And ultimately, voting is a visceral act, right? You're not sitting down there analyzing the numbers and saying, where's the trend? Is how do you feel at the time you go vote, right? Do you feel it's going better off? Polls are one thing. You might be asked, how do you feel right now? But when you go vote, how do you feel? And that's where I think, in 2016, I think one of the, I think the Hillary campaign made many mistakes, but one of them was calling Trump supporters deplorable, right? Because if you're going to support, if you're asking for the vote, if you're asking for somebody to vote for you, right, you persuade them, you make them fall in love with you. You don't call them deplorable. And so that's why, again, the comments about Trump supporters being garbage, similar type of comments, is making it really difficult to persuade the very few undecideds. The vast majority of Trump supporters are going to vote for him no matter what, right? But we're talking about a very small sliver of the electorate, very few in terms of percentage points. 1, 2, 3, probably no more than 5%, where the election is going to be decided.
I agree completely. I will say, to your original point on the right and wrong direction from Dr. Gamara's poll, you saw actually that is trending up since Kamala Harris became the top of the ticket. So I do think that there is certainly room for movement there, where former President Trump has really remained flat there. And so, there doesn't seem to be any growth for him. And not to get into the back and forth on the garbage thing, but A, Kamala Harris never said that. B, there are a record number of public Republican officials coming out in support of Kamala Harris and her campaign and her candidacy. So as far as her kind of bringing those people along, I think she's probably in decent shape.
Have you guys had a moment to think about, and let's talk about, what does the economy look like under Trump? What does the economy look like under Harris? Yeah, go ahead.
That's one of the more clear pictures, and I think one of the things that has actually been motivating people to move towards Kamala Harris, and that is the introduction of Project 2025, and many of even if Donald Trump wants to separate himself, he himself talking about putting a 20% tariff on all imports. The Center for American Progress Action Fund, we did an analysis on what that would mean for everyday families. And that's an average for a family of 4, about $3,900 more a year in costs. So when you're talking about bringing down costs, that's probably not the way you want to go. The other piece, the second most important and very much tied to affordability in the economy, healthcare. So when you're talking about repealing the IRA, which brought down prices for insulin to $35 a month for Medicare and Medicaid patients, right? Removing that. Getting rid of the ACA. So then you have people who are uninsurable. You can't get insurance if you have a precondition. All those lifetime limits are back, and you're out of luck, right? This is where, before the ACA, people were losing their homes paying medical bills. And this is the thing that really scares people, I think. So when you compare the two futures, I think that also becomes really clear.
Absolutely. Carlos?
What I would say is, before Donald Trump was elected in 2016, we heard very similar comments, right? The economy is going to go down the tube. The stock market is going to crash. He is going to implement all these economic measures that are going to affect everyday Americans. And the reality was very, very different, right? On the question of tariffs, very, very important question, because if we look at tariffs as an economic tool, right, you get one one answer. If you look tariffs, however, as a political tool to get others to sit down on the negotiating table, then you get a very different outcome. You might say from an economic perspective, this is the impact of tariffs. However, politically, that might be the only way to get other governments to sit down and to negotiate an agreement that is better, not just for the other country, but most importantly, for Americans. I think one of the things that I think has characterized President Trump is that he's not interested in being the Secretary General of the UN. He's not interested in being popular in other countries. He's interested in advancing American interests. And while putting up a tariff of 10%, 20%, 100% on a product coming from Mexico, China, is not popular with the Chinese, is not popular with the Mexicans, it might be the only strategy that is viable to get the Chinese, to get the Mexicans, to get whomever to sit down with you and negotiate something that benefits Americans, not just now, immediately, but in the long term. So I think if we look at tariffs, we have to look at it not only as an economic instrument, but also as a political instrument that could be used as leverage in a negotiation that economically, ultimately, might be better off. That's what we saw, for example, with the renegotiation of NAFTA that resulted in the North American Free Trade Agreement in the USMCA, that ultimately is a better agreement for Mexico, for Canada, and for the United States. That is now, in a year and a half, going to go up for revisions that might turn out to be not just revisions, but a full renegotiation if the American bargaining position is not improved. And so tariffs are a tool to improve that position in the long term.
Haven't some economists come out already and said the tariffs
Over
would be a good idea?
300 on both sides of the aisle.
Oh, absolutely.
On both sides, not a good idea.
I think that's exactly right. Economists, right? Theoretical economists that look at the curve and say tariffs have this potential economic impact. But economists are well-trained in economics, absolutely. A president has to look at beyond the economics, but also the political factors that go into a tariff. There's same thing with subsidies, for example. There's no argument that a subsidy, when the government subsidizes an industry, right, economically, that might make little sense. If an industry is not doing well, why subsidize it? Why not let the free market? As somebody who supports the free market 100%, that makes sense. However, why do we have such a robust Airbus in Europe? Because European governments, the French government, has invested heavily in that industry and has felt that it is in the national security interest of France, of Europeans, to have a robust Airbus. Same thing with subsidies that we see in the US. From an economic perspective, you can make the case they don't make sense. They make things more expensive. They promote industries that if they're not successful in the free market, that shouldn't exist. Well, from a national security perspective, sometimes it does make sense. And that's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing with iron. That's what we're seeing with a lot of critical industries that, again, there's a disconnect between the purely economic argument and then political national security argument.
Laura, do you
I
want to
think
weigh in?
the Senate Democrats would love to have you on the other side of a negotiating table for the farm bill, by the way, because they are very much for subsidies that are needed. But I want to go back to just take your premise of Donald Trump not wanting to be the Secretary General of the UN and not needing to be popular. I would argue, as a student of foreign policy, that in the long run, being popular and having those alliances with heads of countries is quite good for the American people. And in the long run, to which we were talking about, it winds up being much better for the US to have those alliances, to be able to negotiate on good terms versus adversarial terms.
So I agree about the importance of alliances, right? 100%. I think the America First Trump foreign policy, America first doesn't mean America alone, right? Alliances are critical, but they should not be based on popularity. I think I would much rather have a president who is respected, who is feared, than one who is popular. And so I think there's a big. They're different. I would want to have a president who's both respected and feared, rather than beloved or popular. And again, I think the key distinction is the perception is that America first means America alone. And I think nothing could be further from the truth. America first means exactly that, America first with alliances, but alliances that make sense for the United States. And so yes, alliances are critical. I completely agree. But this should not be based on popularity. Based on good relationships between leaders, that's a different story, right? Leaders should be able to get along. But is it based on popularity? I wouldn't say so.
Anyone have any questions in the room? Go ahead.
I'm with National Public Radio. I cover the Hill, but I travel around the country. And I get a chance especially to cover like Latino voters, Latino candidates. And one thing that strikes me from what you're covering is when I spent time in Vegas and then Arizona was a level of despair that I heard from kind of these younger voters when it came to housing, that I'm not going to be able to buy a house like the many generations before us. And so how is that going to play, do you see, into this election when it comes to these young voters struggling with this housing question?
So I'll just say one thing. I'm a huge fan. I listen to all your reporting. But it's radio, so I had no idea. Very briefly, I do think on the Harris Wells side, they do have a very clear, straight plan, right, for housing. There are two things that come to top of mind. First of all is the building of 3 million homes. That is a goal. It will not be easy, don't get me wrong, but I do think that having such a goal gets us a really good bit of the way to solving some of the problem. The housing issue is incredibly complex, as most of you know, because there's federal stuff that can be done, but there's also the state and local areas that have to be tackled in order to get it all working together. So there are a lot of different pieces, but building is huge. So if the federal government decides that they are going to build 3 million homes, maybe they won't get to 3 million. Maybe they'll get to 1.5 million. That's going to make a huge dent in the affordability. If you are also helping people pay for elder care, as Kamala Harris is proposing in Medicaid, through Medicare, you are also helping them move out of their homes. Right now, a lot of older people cannot move out of their homes because they can't afford to, and they want to downsize. But then those houses are staying with them instead of going on the market. And then lastly, I'd mentioned the $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. I think that is huge, particularly for the Latino community that may not have had the opportunity to amass a lot of money for a down payment, which is really, really difficult for anyone who's ever bought a home who isn't coming from a rich family. We know how difficult that is. So I think that $25,000 down payment assistance would go a long way there.
So I agree. Housing is an incredibly complex issue and one that's very, very important. I think the answer is very simple, right? Supply and demand. I don't have any issues with the first part of the proposal, right? The issue is that there isn't enough supply for the demand. So building more homes, great. I do have a major problem with the second part of the proposal. Saying that you're going to give $25,000 to a first-time home buyer sounds great in theory. What's that going to do in practice? Jack up prices, right? Because if you give somebody now $25,000 to buy their first home, who is going to know that? Not only the person getting it, but the seller. So what's the seller going to do in a free market system? Increase the prices. What happens when prices increase? You have more inflation. And so I think that is exactly what happened at the beginning of the administration when the administration and Congress was the one that passed the bill, injected billions and billions of dollars into the economy and rose inflation the way it rose, higher than in other countries. So I think that the problem I have with the $25,000, it sounds great in theory, but in practice, that's going to increase inflation, which has been going down, right? And so we want it to keep going down, and that's going to increase inflation because now you're going to inject $25,000 in the hands of potentially millions of home buyers who are going to go buy houses that are going to go up in price because the sellers know that now there's $25,000 more in the hands of those first-time home buyers.
So what's the... Oh.
I'm sorry, just real quick. I think that's a super interesting theory and maybe correct. I don't have one way or the other to any empirical evidence one way or the other. For many years now, first-time home buyers have been getting help with down payment assistance, and we haven't really seen that big of piece of an inflation. So I'll just leave that there for the other part. On the inflation, because of the billions of dollars put in through COVID, I will say very clearly and empirically, yes, inflation went up because of that. Also, our economy, the U.S. economy, has done better than anywhere else in the world in recovery because of the investment that was put in, and people were not left out in the cold, becoming homeless or losing their jobs or not having time to find new jobs because their jobs were obsolete after COVID. All those reasons are the reason why the U.S. economy is by far doing the best post-COVID in the world.
So the question would be, why aren't Americans feeling it?
It takes time.
Last question. We'll do last question back here.
Hi, my name's Heidi Smith. I'm an FIU graduate, and I'm a
Yay.
professor in Mexico City, and I teach political economy, so congratulations for this discussion. It's great. So one thing I work with my students, and I'm interested in, this is campaign season. So how much influence does a president have actually on the economy? And then also, will the United States, in whoever wins, influence or not influence or maintain the independence of the Federal Reserve?
I'll take the first crack. So, as you know, economic policy has two components, right? Monetary policy and fiscal policy. The president has practically zero influence over monetary policy. That is the Federal Reserve, the central bank of the United States. And so on monetary policy, very little influence. On fiscal policy, a lot of influence if Congress goes along with these economic plans, right? So fiscal policy is a shared responsibility between Congress and the president. There's something that's beyond the details of monetary policy and economic policy, and that is confidence in the economy. And I think that's where the president has the most impact. The president cannot affect monetary policy, as I mentioned. He cannot affect fiscal policy unless the Congress goes along with him. But there's a lot that the president can do to instill confidence in markets, confidence in international flows. Are people willing to invest in the United States? And so are Americans willing to invest in industries that are critical to our economy, to our national security? So in terms of instilling confidence, I would say quite a bit. In terms of actually directing the intricacies of monetary and fiscal policy, very limited.
All right,
I would
give you the last 30
fully,
seconds.
really quick, fully agree with Carlos on all those points. One small caveat is I would say also just trying to influence Congress itself, right? Like what they drive at and what their priorities are does become part of the conversation in Congress for bills. So just that piece also, but I completely agree on everything else. On your second part of your question, there's only one candidate who has said they want to take control of the Fed, and it's not Kamala Harris.
Right. Awesome. Well, thank you, Laura Rodriguez, Carlos Diaz Rosillo. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. That
All right. As we wrap up, I do want to make one note. That is not Jose Malea, as you know. That is Carlos Diaz Rosillo, equally as charming, equally as thoughtful. Unfortunately, because we ran over, Jose Malea had to drop off, but he committed to rejoining us at some point in the future for another discussion. His work with the Libre Initiative has been incredible. He's an incredible thought leader in South Florida, and so it was exciting to have him be a part of this broader ecosystem. A few people I definitely want to thank before we leave. Gotti, what an amazing job moderating this. And I heard this live, and it's recorded. Carlos Becerra committed a lifetime of Pasalitos to you. So I just want to make sure that you know that. It's preserved in the recording. There's evidence. You're welcome back anytime for Pasalitos. And of course, I want to thank Carlos Becerra for hosting us in the FIU DC office. Has always been an incredible partner, an extension of the university, an incredible partner for our communities up here in Washington. And of course, last but not least, Dr. Eduardo Gamarra, who without his thoughtful, visionary leadership, we would not have this poll in the ecosystem today. And so this was a launch of just the 2024, just the October series. We expect to be doing this poll multiple times per year. On the off election cycles, we'll be running it twice. On cycle election, we're going to be running it 4 times a year. And again, we hope to amass an incredible, thoughtful, meaningful data that helps us understand not just where Hispanic voices are today, but where they're going. And I think that's important. And as Scotty pointed out, we're talking about a potential growth of 14.7 Latinos in the electorate today to possibly 17% by the time we get to 2032. And so this demographic is going to continue to grow and be an instrumental part of the American electorate. And then lastly, we had a packed room here. This was amazing. What you didn't see is we had over 315 people online also tuning in from around the world, we hope, but certainly from around the country. So exciting to have so much interest in the work that we're doing. And so with that, this wraps up our session. Thank you all for being here.